All right, and we are live. Welcome, everybody. Brian Hite, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. I've been really pumped to chat with you. One from the work that you do in psychology and mindset, but stunt work is so fascinating to me from the work that you do, from both like the physical side and the mental side. I know you've been like 3 decades of that work, which has led you along this path. So to kick this off, if people don't know, can you just give a brief background of who you are, kind of how you got started in this field into what you're doing right now?
Yeah, sure. Right now I kind of do a combination of a lot of things, and I'll get to that in just a little bit. But yeah, stunts started when I was 20. It started when I was in college. I'd spent the first 2 years of college just struggling, just floundering, just trying to figure out where I fit and what job I wanted to do, what was going to be next. Because I had no idea. I was just told you're supposed to graduate from high school and then graduate from college and then you get a job. But nobody filled in the
And
gaps of all
then
right,
you get
well, from
married, have
college
the
to
kids.
job,
Yeah,
how do we do that?
boom, boom, boom. Mhm.
Yeah, I had no idea what I was going to do, and I was halfway through college. Well, then I knew a guy who was the company manager of the Batman stunt show at the Six Flags in New Jersey. I was going to college at Rutgers at the time, which is in New Jersey, and he got us tickets to see the show. And I came out and I saw it, and just right, and that was it. That was the minute that I knew. I finally had some kind of clarity around what I wanted to do. It was amazing. I sat down and explosions went off and motorcycles came jumping out and people were falling off of things. It was I spent 20 minutes mesmerized at what
Mm.
was that was going on. And because I knew the guy who was the company manager, I was able to go backstage and talk to the performers, which was just, I mean, that was just really fortunate because I was able to ask them, okay, so if I wanted this job, how do I get it? And they
Mm.
said, well, you got to know how to do fights, high falls, and motorcycles. And then you go to the audition, you see if you get it. And if you do, then here you are. And so that's what I did. I learned fights and high falls. I bought a dirt bike and I practiced on it. I went to the audition and I got the job. And so that summer, the summer after my junior year, I did that show at that Six Flags, and it was the best summer I've ever had in my life. I mean, I couldn't even believe I was being paid to do the things I was doing. I was learning so much and I was having so much fun doing it. It was, it, I'd found my spot. And at that point I just realized, all right, so stunts is what I want to do. This is the job that I want to pursue. And so I started learning more about how to do that in film and TV, and et cetera and so forth. But what that also did is make college completely irrelevant. And so I'd already been
Right.
struggling the first part with the whole thing. I hated school. I hated school from kindergarten on. I didn't like it at all, ever. And then when I finally figured out, all right, so here's what I'm going to do, and it doesn't involve a college degree, man, the motivation plummeted.
Yeah.
So it was a struggle to get through. I did somehow get through the first semester of my senior year, but my second semester, I didn't. I was failing everything. And I ended up dropping all the classes, and I did this show one more summer out there in New Jersey and then moved to LA. So just dropped out of college with one semester to go. And while I was in LA, I was able to do the same show. They have a Six Flags out there as well. And I was able to do the show there while I was getting into the film and TV world. And that's how the whole stunt thing began.
Mhm.
But about 4 or 5 years into that, I decided I wanted to go back and get the degree, like finish it. Wasn't easy back then. I couldn't just get on a computer and do it. I had to actually physically move back across the country to New Jersey for 3.5 months to
Mhm.
finish the semester. But I was at a place in my life where I could do that, and so I did. And then I continued on with a master's degree in sports psychology and a PhD in organizational psychology, but never with the intention of working in those fields. I took one
Mhm.
of two classes in high school was interesting to me. One was drama and the other was psychology. So I became a
Okay.
stuntman and now I'm doing psychology.
Kind of a
So
marriage to the two right there.
that was
Yeah.
it. Those were the two classes that I cared about. So I knew I was going to major in psychology in college, which is what I did, but I never really pursued, I don't know. Once I'd found stunts, that was it. But I ended up coaching gymnastics, and some of the gymnasts that I was coaching, when I would take them to meets, it was weird. I mean, at the beginning, when I didn't really know what I was looking at,
Mhm.
they were unpredictable. I'd been practicing with them for months. I knew what they were capable of, and then I'd take them to a meet and they wouldn't perform.
Mhm.
And and so, the only thing I could think, all right, well, it's got to be mental. That's the only thing that makes any sense. I know they're physically capable of doing this stuff. I've watched it. So I started reading about sports psychology and getting into that literature a little bit, and then that's what led me into the masters, and then continuing on with the PhD just because it was interesting material.
Mhm.
But life does what it does, and so next thing you know, I find myself working for the Army as a sport performance psychology consultant. Did that for 2 years up in Washington State. Quit that job, went back to stunts again in LA for another 4 or 5 years, and then went back to the Army again, this time in the Nashville area, which is where I am now. So I'm originally from Nashville. I left, and now I'm back via the circuitous route I just said. But I was working
Mhm.
at Fort Campbell, basically doing the same thing. It was traditional sport performance psychology for soldiers, meaning just working with them to make sure that their minds were in a place where they were capable of performing their best for particular tasks. So
Mhm.
the first time around, it was at the range, or it was on, at working with artillery things, or working with medical tasks, or finding IEDs, or whatever it might be. But there was a specific performance that we would center the training around, so that the intent was for the soldiers to be able to get their minds in a place where they could do whatever that task was as well as possible. But at that second time, the program had expanded to include resilience. So this was more, how do we provide the tools and resources that soldiers can use no matter what situation they're in? Well, it's
Mhm.
not about the range or the IEDs or any specific performance. It's about life.
Right.
So how can we develop those skills and help them leverage those skills when they need them most? And I really gravitated toward that. That was really great material for me, and particularly at that point in my life. I'd gone through a divorce. I was going through, just various changes, trying to deal with my daughter as a single parent, and being able to teach and be around and be immersed in that resilience literature was really helpful for me personally too. And I did that job for 9 years, and it was great. Got to travel all around the country, around the world, really, teaching those classes. And then I quit. It had come to the end, and it was time to move on. And so that's what I did. I opened my own business, thinking at the time it was going to be traditional sport performance psychology,
Mhm.
not just for athletes, but also for performers, singers,
Sure.
dancers, musicians, stunt people, etc. But after a little bit of doing that, I realized, this isn't. It doesn't feel like I'm meshing all of the interests that I have and the experiences that I've had.
Mhm.
So that's when I rebranded. I'm doing Brian Hite Global now,
Mhm.
and rather than just doing traditional sport performance psychology, now I'm focused on high stakes environments. So how do we keep ourselves at our best from a performance standpoint, from a well-being standpoint, resilience, motivation, all of that in high stakes environments? And that allows me to work with a wider variety of people. I get to work with corporate, I get to work with educators, and as well as athletes, performers, first responders. So it's a wide variety of people, all who deal in these high stakes environments, these places where the consequences of doing well really matter, and not just on a one-time basis, but often consistently over the
Right.
course of years. So that's another interesting little component of it too, is that sometimes we talk about specific performances and how can we set conditions for success in those, but often it's more of the trajectory. How can you maintain longevity over time
Mhm.
without becoming burnt out, or and just remaining at your best throughout? And that's
Right.
allowed me to bring in the stunt experience, the 10 years of working with the military experience, the academic experience. Everything has come together in this area, and I get to do not just one-on-one coaching, but keynote speeches and workshops and some writing and videos and stuff like that. So it's a cool place to be, because it feels like, rather than waking up and having to choose which hat I'm going to wear, am I going to be the stuntman today, or am I going to be the
Mhm.
author today, or am I going to be the whatever? Everything is under the same umbrella, and I can just wake up and do me in all of these different facets, and so I feel a lot more comfortable. It's a lot more fun.
Yeah, that's really cool. There's quite a few branches there that I want to climb on that. One from the high stakes as well as kind of the pressure situations, which I think is interesting. And everybody can have their own version of what is high stakes probably in their own life, right? But going back to when you like first got into the stunt work, was there something specific about like seeing that show? Were you already thinking about I want to do something that's got some adrenaline behind it or putting my body into it? Like what was it about like that specific show that spoke to you so much of like, oh, I really want to go and pursue this?
Yeah, well, I mean, from the time I was little, I've always leaned into physical challenges,
Mhm.
whether it was on my bike, and trying to jump the next biggest thing or ride over the whatever, and in sports or climbing trees, rocks. It really didn't matter. I mean, whatever it was kind of pushing the edge physically and
Mhm.
challenging me physically. I really enjoyed that. And this job was that, but on steroids, and I got paid. So it was just a great opportunity to go have fun. And I was 20, I mean, what
Right.
20-year-old doesn't want to go get on motorcycles and fun? Well, probably a lot of them. But anyway,
Mhm.
I really enjoyed it. I saw it and and it captured me because it was stuff that if I'd come across it just in the regular world, I still would have said, yes, please. I would have
Sure.
raised my hand and said, can I play with you guys? And done it that way.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, you can definitely see on the surface the physical demands that a job like that does, but I'm sure there's a lot of mental demands at the same time. Was that something that you knew that psychology and like that aspect of resilience, like that was part of the job? Was that something that you learned early on in stunt work, or was that something that evolved and built more over time where you realized this is just as much about the mind as it is really focusing on the body, like learning the fights, learning the physical stunts? How much of it was the mental side of that at the same time?
Yeah, well, like you said at the beginning, I've been a stuntman for 30 years
Mhm.
now, and I'd say that for the first, it's not that the mental side wasn't that I didn't understand that it was there. I just didn't have any structure or language around how to talk about it or
Mhm.
any real concrete ways to consistently do anything with it. It wasn't until I started the master's program really that happened. That was about 7 or 8 years into my career. So for the
Mhm.
last 22, 23 years, yes, it's been, and it's a no brainer. I mean, from the minute I started that master's program in sports psychology, what was really cool about it wasn't just the learning, although that was great. It was the immediate applicability of what I was learning. I didn't have to wait to go work with clients or try to find somebody else to help. I could put this into practice in my life
Mhm.
right then and there, and not just in my job. But that's the other thing that I think when you start hearing about sport performance psychology, obviously what comes into mind are athletes and performers,
Right.
and that's what it is. But the skills are really ones that just help keep us grounded, help keep us centered, help keep us focused, help keep us confident, help keep us motivated, and keep us in the right space to be able to do whatever it is that we're trying to do. And that's relevant wherever you are. So this is why when people talk to me about performance, I define it very, very broadly. When I talk about performance, what I mean is anything that we're doing that we care about doing well. That if we
Mm.
didn't do it well, it wouldn't matter to us.
Mm.
So that's a performance, and that might be a conversation with a spouse. It might be doing homework with a kid. It might be cooking a meal for the
Right.
family or preparing for a party or what. I mean, it could be any number of things. All of those things qualify as performances.
Mhm.
And as such, we can prepare for them. We can have ways to stay focused and at our best during them. And we need to have strategies to recover from them.
Mhm.
So to answer your question, it took me a little bit to where I got any sort of structured, deliberate approach to the mental side of stunts. But once I got into that program and I started learning these things, it really was a no brainer being able to put them into practice regularly. And I benefited tremendously. I have no doubt about that.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. Like, was there any specific thing that teachers or mentors in the stunt field like talked about mental resilience, or was it more like just like learning how to do this and then the psychological side kind of came along for the ride and
Yeah,
you went on your own
it's
with that?
funny. They talk about it the same way that any commentator does. Turn on any sport and you'll listen to the commentators and they'll talk about somebody doing well and doing not, and you won't have to listen for long before some sort of psychological thing comes up. He lost confidence. He's too nervous.
Right.
He lost his focus. You'll hear these things and they come out regularly. But what you don't hear are strategies for how to fix it.
Right.
Like they'll notice that it's important and they'll notice when it's not there, but they won't give you any specifics about how to do it. And I saw this in the Army too. This is one of the when I was out in the field, working with one unit, they were doing, it was a unit of combat engineers. So their primary job was route clearance, meaning that they'd go along a route trying to find all the IEDs and make sure that the route was clear so that convoys could come through without getting blown up. That was the combat engineer's job. And so they would just drive at 5 miles an hour down these roads looking for the bombs. And so that was their main job. What their main job wasn't was clearing buildings. But this was back in the time when the Iraq War was going on, and it didn't matter what your job was
Right.
primarily. You were going to go
Job
clear
was, yeah.
buildings because it was just there were just buildings everywhere. So before they deployed, they went to a place called the National Training Center. It's in the Mojave Desert. It's out at Fort Irwin in Southern California. And it's like the Super Bowl training event that you go. So you train for a year or so, year or 2 years, and then you go to NTC, National Training Center, and you get evaluated and signed off on, blessed off on to go deploy. And during that NTC rotation, I was out there following these combat engineers around. I was embedded in the unit. I was going where they went and just moving with them through the environment. And one of those environments was clearing buildings. And they went through and cleared these buildings, and it was just, quite frankly, a train wreck. And I didn't even really know anything about clearing buildings at the time. Now I've spent countless hours in shoot houses, and I could teach a class on it probably. But at the time, I didn't really know much, but I could tell that they were bad at it for sure. And I saw all the psychological reasons why. They were getting too amped up. They were too nervous. The communication was off. Their attention was narrowing because of their amped up. And all of these things I saw. And what they did, they came out after doing this thing, and the guy who was evaluating them, they're called observer controllers, an OC, said, here's what you guys got to do. You need to calm down, and you need to take a tactical pause before you go into each room. And that was 100% accurate advice. That was the best thing that they could do. But what he didn't tell them was how to calm down,
Right.
or what to do during the tactical pause that would keep them focused and keep them where they needed to be. And that's where my training came in. So after he said that, he walked away, and I pulled him around. I was like, look, just like the guy said, you need to calm down, take a tactical pause before you go in each room. Remember the stuff that we talked about in our training. Remember we talked about cue words, routines, the breathing, just these different, mental imagery, different ways to use that. We talked about all of these things. Now, how might you put this in a way that will meet that intent that the evaluator just said? And they talked about it. We talked about it together, and they came up with some strategies, and they put them in. And let me tell you, it was night and day. I mean, to the point where the evaluator guy was even like, well, what is happening right now? Because they were just a whole different, they flowed through, everything was better. And so that's really what it comes down to. So the mental side of things and those strategies that we can put in, it is abundantly clear to anybody who performs at any level anywhere that confidence is important, that motivation is important, that energy activation is important, that attention is important. But what they don't know are the specific techniques that can be used in order to help ensure that those things are in place. And that's the training that I provide. So having that stuff in my world as a stunt person was really, really helpful. So it wasn't just about, hey, you need to go and be confident, or you know what, just get in there and go. Like the words around the mental side, it was actually, no kidding, things that I can do, just like any other skill development that I didn't know how to do once upon a time, and now I do because I practiced it, learned it, and now I'm proficient. The mental side it was the same way. I was able to practice those skills, and they became innate, automatic, just like physical skills are.
Yeah, it is. It's such an interesting part of the world of mental performance and psychology, Brian, where we all know this is like, yeah, this is important stuff, like be confident. It's like, but they're just words. It's like actually practically implementing it, of how to do that specifically in something that's a high stakes based environment, right? I mean, take from what you've done with, stunts that can really physically cause, some harm if you don't do it right, or military personnel where like you can practice that probably as much as possible. But then once you're in it, like where this is actually the real thing, and it could be the difference between life or death, all of a sudden it's much different in that situation.
Yeah, well, I mean, the stakes. I would say this, yes and no. I would say that the stakes are important, and when we get in those situations, obviously we want to perform our best because bad things can happen or good things won't. It
Mhm.
goes both ways, and when we get into pressure, we can talk about that.
Sure.
But at the same time, most of us want to be at our best no matter what the stake. I mean, if I'm going to do something, I want to do it as well as I possibly can.
Mhm.
And I can't do something better than my best. So whether the stakes are high or low, if I'm going into a situation and I'm thinking I'm going to do the best I can do, then it's all equal. It's like walking on a line on the ground versus walking on a line 100 feet in the air. It's the same line. Now, the stakes are higher in one than the
Right.
other,
Yeah.
but what it takes to do it right is not different. I mean, it's one foot in front of the other with balance. It's the exact same thing.
Mhm.
So it's the same thing in all of our performance situations. What it takes to do it right doesn't change whether the stakes are high or low. And that's something I think that it's really important. When I was coaching soccer, I had to kind of, because I coached my daughter's soccer team for a while, and I had to really kind of coach the parents around this too, because we would get into a tournament and we'd get into, whatever, the final game. Like, oh, it's a big game. It's the final game. It's really mad. You got to really bring it together. You got to really focus.
Right.
And I'm like, it's, it's just a game. I want them to
Mhm.
prepare and play the same way that they played all the other games. It's not different. Just
Mhm.
because it's the last game of the tournament, I mean, the stakes are what they are. But in order for us to do well, in order for us to create conditions for the outcomes we want, those things don't change. What
Mhm.
it takes us to be at our best doesn't change. And I think that if people realize that, that can be very, it can take a load off of people's minds. It can take a lot of weight off their shoulders, and it can really just provide some relief of, oh yeah, if I got here, so if
Right.
I just do what do what I did to get here, then I'll probably be all right. Now, there's no guarantee that you're going to succeed because there are other variables at
Sure.
play. In any performance environment, you're not in control of everything, but you are in control of some stuff. And if you can identify that stuff and keep your attention there and make sure that that stuff is going right, you've maximized the likelihood of achieving what you've set out to achieve. And that's
Right.
the best we can ever do.
Yeah. No, I think that's a beautiful point, Bright. It's like, and I want to ask you about pressure because I think that's such an interesting topic. But it reminds me when I had Dana Cavalea on the podcast, who was the strength and conditioning coach for the Yankees during the '90s when they were a dynasty, and he was working with Mariano Rivera, greatest closer of all time, and asked him once, he's like, Mo, I gotta ask you, like, how do you stay so calm? And like it's game six, game seven, biggest situations, and like your heart rate seems like it's at the same rate as it's just like a spring training game. And Mariano Rivera said, there's no such thing as a big moment. It's like it's still
Yeah.
60 feet, 6 inches from the mound to home. The only change is all the external noise out there, but it's the exact same thing. And again, it's a cool thing to hear of like, yeah, that's awesome. But in his mind, no, that's what he actually understood. It's like, no, there is no such thing as one big pitch versus another one, whether it's to win the World Series or it's a spring training game. It's the exact same distance from home to first base. All I have to do is just treat it the exact same way.
Yeah, and truly, you'll drive yourself crazy if you don't, and that does lead us into pressure. But I can tell you, from just in the stunt, and again, I want to reemphasize for people, this isn't just about life and limb, death, Super Bowl, World Series, all of that. This is anything where you care about things happening. The stakes are high, like you said at the very beginning, and I thought it was a great thing to point out that we determine the stakes, whether they're high or not. What's important to me may not be important to you. I might be in a situation where I say the stakes are high. You look at it and you're like, really?
Right.
Why is that? I don't get it. But from the standpoint of, when I've been in stunts, it will 100% drive you crazy if you're focused on the potential consequences, and that's the important word,
Mhm.
potential, the imagined consequences. Now, we may be able to guess in a fairly accurate way, if this happens, meaning I screw up, then this will be the likely consequence of that.
Mhm.
And because there's a high probability of certain things and low probability of other things. But at the end of the day, we're just predicting the future. And as
Right.
human beings, we're usually pretty bad at that. And and for sure, predicting the future when you need to be performing in the moment, that's not helpful at all. Because why? The future is going to be manifested by what we do right now. The future is going to be determined by the actions we take currently in this particular moment.
Hmm.
So if the future is something that we really care about, and we recognize that it's going to be the result of what we do right now, then it behooves us to put our attention in the right now. Like that's where it needs to be. And so this is where pressure comes in. And
Hmm.
the idea of pressure, the way that I conceptualize it, and this was interesting because you even used this terminology earlier. You said pressure situations. And I was talking to somebody and they said the exact same thing to me. And for whatever reason, I've heard it, 1,000 times at least over the years. Pressure situations, got to perform well under pressure. But for whatever reason, it stuck with me. It clicked this time. A red flag went up, and I thought to myself, "Wait a minute, what? No, there are no such things as
Hmm.
pressure situations. There are
Hmm.
just situations, and we can experience pressure in them, or we cannot. Just like your baseball guy story."
Hmm.
And that's not even a new concept. This goes back 2,000 years at
Right.
least to Stoic philosophers, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, talking about it's not events that disturb us, it's how we think about those events that disturbs us. So this idea of just labeling a situation as a pressure situation is inaccurate. It's not true. And if we really tune into our experiences, we'll be able to come up with examples of that. So, for example, for me, as I was kind of thinking through this myself and just going through my own life and experiences, I realized there was a show that I was working on. It was a TV show a long time ago. It was a Pamela Anderson show called VIP. And my role, I was supposed to come out the back of this truck. There was this U-Haul truck thing driving down the road, and there was a fight happening inside it. I get thrown out the back of it, hit the ground and roll. And before we were doing that, I felt all kinds of pressure. I mean, I remember it. I remember feeling very like there were these, I mean, really big time stunt guys watching on the
Right.
sideline. They were there, and the coordinator was a friend of mine. I didn't want to let him down in front of, like, there were all these things that were going through my mind about, if I screw this up, then it's going to affect my career. It's going to affect his career, or I may get hurt. I can't get hurt. I got to pay bills. Like, how am I going to pay bills if I get hurt? There are all of these
Hmm.
things going through my mind. Lots of pressure. Well, then cut to, I don't know, maybe 3 months ago, I was working on a TV show called Righteous Gemstones. And same thing. I'm in the back of the truck, it's driving down the road. My job, come out the back of the truck, hit the ground and roll. And I experienced no pressure. I
Hmm.
was just present. I was just in the moment thinking about, okay, so, all right, well, this is the position my body needs to be in. And this top is going to come up. So where does my hand need to be for that? And how am I going to land? And how, it was just all of the task relevant things. And it's almost the identical situation, right? I mean, I'm in the back of the truck, coming out the back of the truck that's driving down the road. In one case, I experience a lot of pressure, and in the other, I don't. And, I mean, truthfully, if there are such things as pressure situations, I would think that riding in the back of a truck and flinging yourself out the back of it to hit the
Right.
ground and
It's
roll
a pretty objective
while,
example.
while you're on camera being recorded and all these, 100 people are watching you, I would think that would qualify as a pressure situation.
Hmm.
And in one case it did, and the other it didn't. And that really just begs the question, okay, well, why did I experience pressure in one situation and not the other?
Hmm.
And the answer is the consequences. So when we experience pressure, pressure is about the consequences. It's not even
Hmm.
about the outcome. It's not even about doing well or not doing well, success versus failure. It is about the consequences. I can experience equal pressure thinking about, man, if this thing goes right, if I kill it, if I knock it out, my career is going to take off. I'm going to be on the fast track. I'm set. I can experience just as much pressure there as, man, if I screw this up, they're going to fire me. I don't
Right.
know where
Yeah.
my next job is going to come
Hmm.
from. I have a family to feed. Pressure comes from both places, but so it's not even about the consequence, success, failure. It's about about the outcome. It's about the consequence that follows from the outcome, or at least the consequences that we believe will follow from the outcome. And
Hmm.
this is not even a point that I parse with people very often either, because sometimes people will be like, look, are you going to try to tell me the consequences aren't as important as I think that they are? Like, the outcome's not that big a deal. No, I've been in situations many times where if I screwed it up, I or somebody I was working with may not go home that
Right.
day. And I've worked with the military for 10 years, and not just, support people. I'm talking about the people who are on the front line, where again, under certain conditions, if they screw it up, they or somebody they're working with may not go home. I've been in those environments. I've been in those situations. So I'm not here to tell anybody that the consequences and the stakes that they have in those moments aren't important.
Hmm.
What I am saying is that if you're focused on those, then your attention's in the wrong place and you will experience pressure.
Hmm.
That's where the pressure comes from.
That's such a it's such an important point you brought up there because I think a lot of times we think that, oh, like just don't think about the consequences, but that's saying like, no, like those are real, like that's actually real stuff, but the only thing you can control is the present moment of what you're doing right now. So it's not acknowledging that, yeah, those aren't there. Like, no, that's actually real, but it's bringing you back in so you can perform at what you can control, which is that present moment. I always think of it, Brian, as you were saying that in my world of coaching in the kettlebell world, to be certified, you have to do a snatch test. So you have to snatch a kettlebell 100 times in 5 minutes, and it's a nasty test. It's always exhausting, like your body's on fire and your throat burns, and it's going to be a challenging thing because all of a sudden the clock's on, and now you have a deadline. You have to do it in 5 minutes, and it's so easy to drive yourself nuts beforehand of like get really stressed out. Oh my God, what's going to happen? And I've been doing this forever, and still some of that angst starts to come up. But as soon as you do like that first snatch, you're like, oh yeah, I've done this a million times before. It's like, so it's so interesting how our monkey mind can just get us into a tizzy at those times. And I'm curious with you, like with that of thinking about the consequences, is that something that we can really fully like get out of, or is that just like, I mean, it's part of our brain structure of just like our brain is going to look for threats and it's never going to fully go away, but the best way that you can do it is just acknowledge it and then bring yourself back into the present moment.
Yeah, well, you mentioned an important thing because this is what differentiates stress and pressure. So you mentioned our brains looking for threats. So we perceive certain things as threats. That's important for stress. So let me just so I talked about pressure being the result of focusing on the consequences of the future. Stress is the result of how we perceive the situation itself. This comes from, for any theory geeks out there, the transactional model of stress. This is from Lazarus and Folkman's, where you can find that. But essentially what it says is that stress comes from two things. One is we perceive a situation as a threat. The second part of that, though, is we believe that we don't have sufficient resources to deal with that threat. So if we think something bad might happen to us and we don't think that we have the resources to necessarily mitigate that or to handle it, that's where stress comes in. So stress is about the situation and how we perceive the situation, whereas pressure is about the consequences of the outcome. That's where pressure lives as opposed to stress. So to answer your question, if we're talking about stress, then it becomes really, really important that we're able to shift our perspective from threat to opportunity. And that can happen in any number of ways. Now, this is depending on the environment, and really this comes down to, are you choosing to be in this situation? Sometimes when we're in these situations, it's because we put ourselves there.
Mhm.
And it's up to us. I actually had this conversation with my daughter. She does rock climbing. She's 11. And I said, it's really important for us to start to recognize, number one, what is the risk level of what it is that we're looking to do, and number two, what is our risk tolerance level, and are those things
Mhm.
matched up? So I might, on a scale of 1 to 10, say this activity, climbing that particular rock is a risk level of 5. But I have a low risk tolerance. And
Mhm.
so for me, a 5 is too high. I'm not taking it. I'm not doing it. Whereas, somebody might say, all right, the risk for that is at an 8, but I'm fine with that because my risk tolerance level is higher. So if we choose to put ourselves in the situation, it's different from if we just happen to find ourselves in situations. That's the first thing.
Mm.
So if we're in a situation that we've chosen and we're perceiving it as a threat, then maybe we just need to not do it. I mean, that's certainly an
Right.
option. You got to evaluate that for ourselves. But it's not hard to shift. Let me say it differently. It is simple. It can be challenging to shift our perspectives from threat to opportunity. But it absolutely can happen because any circumstance we find ourselves in, we 100% can get better from it.
Mhm.
That's not to say that we would necessarily want to repeat it for example, I had problems with alcohol earlier in my life. I had 2 divorces. I wouldn't want to repeat any of that, but I'll tell you, those things were opportunities for me to grow as an individual,
Mhm.
to learn. It pushed me in directions that I wouldn't have gone otherwise, I don't think. So for me, looking back on those moments, do I want to do them again? No, absolutely not. Am I grateful for them? Yes, I am. I see them now as opportunities. And we can do that in the moment too. It doesn't have to be retrospective. So we can say to ourselves, okay, so let's say I do screw this thing up. Is there a way to look at even just having this experience as an opportunity?
Mhm.
And even beyond, do I screw it up or get it right? If we just think about it as an experience, I'm grateful to be here. You know how many people would, like, for example, I work with athletes all the time. There was a tennis player that I was working with not too long ago. And I said, anytime you start feeling stressed out or frustrated or irritated about whatever, I said, why don't you just put this thought in your brain? Think about how many people are on the planet right now who would love to trade places with you
Mhm.
right now, to be outside on a beautiful day with a amazing racket and just be able to hit balls back and forth running around.
Mhm.
Just think about that.
Yeah.
And that's not a hard thing. And it doesn't require us to fake anything. That's something that really drives me crazy is when you hear fake it till you make it, or
Right.
it's
Yeah.
like people get this idea in your mind when I say stuff like this that I mean just gloss it over or turn a camel into a stallion. It's not what
Right.
it's not what I'm saying. It's a camel, and it's whatever it is. But there are ways to enjoy the opportunity. There are ways to look at it as valuable. Maybe not enjoy. That's
Mhm.
probably the wrong word. But there are ways to gain value, to gain wisdom, to learn from and become better as a result of whatever we're doing.
Mhm.
And if we can keep that perspective going into these situations, man, it does. It will change our perspectives from a threat to the opportunity. So that's part one of stress. We can
Mhm.
lower, if not eliminate, stress altogether by just changing our perspective from threat to opportunity.
Mhm.
The second part of it is around our resources. Now, when I talk about resources, there are many, many resources, but I usually focus on 4: physical, mental, emotional, and social. Financial resources, those are in there too. Some people have spiritual resources. So there are other resources. The 4 that I just listed, it's not a comprehensive list, but they are ones that we typically have control over, and they are ones that we can intentionally develop, which is
Mhm.
why I focus on them. So recognizing what are our resources and what are some ways that we can bring those resources to bear in this situation, that takes care of that other part of the stress. So, in other words, maybe I still think of it as a threat. Something bad might happen to me. I need
Mhm.
to protect myself in some kind of way. Well, do I have the resources to handle it? You know what? I think I do. I've practiced regulating and managing my energy activation levels. I know how to keep my attention and focus where it needs to be. I understand how to communicate with people in a way that's beneficial. I have the resources to deal with these circumstances and do it well.
Mhm.
That will transition the stress as well.
Yeah. I think it's interesting when you mentioned the tennis player and it's like you put that thought in your head, right? I think one of the misconceptions, Brian, that I've heard with mindset is you think that there's a specific practice that's immediately going to take you from feeling like shit to feeling great. It's like, no, it's more of a redirect. Like it's kind of like turning the car around. Like it's going to take a little time to get back to where you were. So it might not make you feel great right off the bat, but it is going to bring you towards that flow on that other side. But of those 4 resources you mentioned there, the physical, mental, the emotional, and the social, does one jump out at you of people you've worked with that seem like that one's lagging a little bit more behind in a lot of people, specifically with high performers? Is it more of the mental side, or is it maybe like the social side where they don't have like a crew of connections around? Does one jump out at you a little bit more than others?
Um, it really depends on the people, but it's hard to say because all of them work synergistically together. They're holistic in nature. In other words, you can't move the needle on one without moving the needle on all of them.
Mhm.
And anybody who's, I mean, for real, if you've ever not gotten enough sleep or you're hungry, we've all been there.
Right.
That's a physical thing. But how does that affect our attention and our ability to focus and process information and solve problems? And how does it affect our emotions? Are we more in control or are we more volatile with our emotions? Maybe lose our patience a little bit more quickly. And in those circumstances, do we really want to interact with people? Do we want to have long conversations? And if we do, are we as amiable as we might be otherwise? Probably not. So all of these things go together. And it's the same thing. If I wake up in a bad mood, I might feel drained. I may not feel like I have enough energy to work out or put forth whatever physically. And again, might have some of the same problems mentally. But it works the other way too. If I get a solid workout in, if I get, my body moving right, then all of a sudden I gain this clarity in my mind, and my emotional state just kind of mellows out. And I'm much more interested in approaching and dealing with other people. Same thing can happen with meditation. So it's not physical at all. I'm sitting still. I'm mentally, but it affects me physically and it affects me emotionally and socially. So that's why I say it's really hard to parse those things. We can talk about them individually, and there are certain things that probably primarily are related to each of those different areas. But man, it's kind of a cool thing too, because if we are deficient or lower or less confident in one of those areas, we know that we can develop it, that the other areas that we are more aware of, more confident in, maybe have more resources to develop or whatever, that we can augment the ones that are lower with the ones that are higher. And that's a great thing.
Yeah. I want to ask you one more thing about pressure, because I love just this concept. I know you've spoken before, like pressure is an illusion, which I think we covered a lot of in here. But one of the things is the person who says, I thrive under pressure, like where some people like, it's like, I need that pressure, and there's some dopamine or adrenaline rush that seems
Yeah.
like they move them there. With that person there, do you think is that like the similar like illusion or like a fugazi that they're putting over like this? It's almost like the Michael Jordan thing of like The Last Dance, where he was like making up like people saying shit about him to motivate him to go like to another level from there. What do you think's going on with people like, because I've been that person myself of like,
Hmm.
oh, like give me that deadline, and all of a sudden I feel like I get into flow mode. But it doesn't seem like it's the healthiest way to really approach, going into the work that we need to do.
Yeah, well, two things. You're right about the illusion, but we haven't talked specifically about that. The reason I refer to pressure as an illusion isn't because it's fake or not real, or that we aren't actually experiencing when we are, because we are. It's an illusion in the same way that visual illusions are. When we look at it one way, so for example, the best example, I love using this in presentations too. Most people have seen it. There's a picture where if you look at it one way, it looks like an old lady with a like a hat or some kind of shawl or something. And if you look at it a different way, it looks like a young lady.
Right. Yep. I've
But
seen that.
it's truly about just our perspective. The data aren't changing.
Yeah.
The stimuli that are coming into our eyes
There's
is
the
not
rabbit and the
different.
duck
It's
one too
all
that
the
you could
same.
say.
It's
Yeah.
just about how our brains are organizing the lines. And pressure is the same way. If the circumstances that we're in, if our brains are organizing the lines in a way that focuses our attention on those consequences, then we experience pressure. But in that same circumstance, if we switch our perspective to now, right now, task relevant things, then the pressure goes away. And this isn't even a hard thing to convince people of, because most people, you mentioned the words, the zone, flow, whatever it might be, we've all been there at some point, in some case, in some circumstance. And when we're there, when we're completely present, completely engaged in what's happening, and everything is just moving seemingly of its own accord, there is no pressure. There is no stress. It doesn't exist. Anybody who's describing a flow state will never use the word pressure in that state. It's not there. But that's the state where we can perform to our potential, which is why I say we don't need to learn how to perform well with pressure. We don't even need to reduce pressure. We need to eliminate pressure. Because when pressure's gone, that's when we're in the place where we can perform our best. Now, to the people that you're talking about that'll give it, yeah, but I do well. Like, I need that pressure. I hear you. But here's what I think is going on is when we experience pressure, the sympathetic nervous system gets activated. When the sympathetic nervous system gets activated, our arousal levels go up. And for any given performance, there's a right amount of arousal, meaning our pumped upness, for us to do well in that situation. So I think what's going on is that that pressure may be helping, but indirectly through the increase of arousal. That's what's going on. And so through that pumped upness, but still got the residual effects of the anxiety and all the things that go along with pressure. So we got the right arousal level, and we may end up even performing well, but we didn't have a good time doing it,
Oh, right.
or we still experience that pressure. But there are other ways to enhance that arousal level, to get that heart rate up to where it needs to be, to get that energy activation where we need it for us to perform well. Pressure is a way that can do that. So I would say, people are not performing well because of pressure. It's in spite of pressure. They've got that arousal level where it needs to be. Pressure is what put it there.
Mm.
So they think they need pressure in order to perform well. But there's that middle part. There's the arousal. That's what's really important. So think about if we could get that arousal level where it needs to be, eliminate pressure, optimize that state that we're in the present moment where we're focused on task relevant things. Now we've created the conditions for us to be at our best.
Mm. That makes sense. Yeah, because that arousal piece, like I mean, that can be addicting, like because it makes you feel alive. It's like almost everything's like now like it's on, like you feel like you're in that zone, and it's easy to misconstrue that thinking, oh, the pressure is doing that.
Yeah.
No, it's actually just the arousal that you just did. You're just giving the
Yeah.
credit to something that actually is not there.
Well, and you mentioned another term too that's important that I think gets conflated in all of this as well, and that's motivation.
Yeah.
So if I'm doing something, and I'm motivated to do it, that means that I care about it for some reason. I mean, by definition, that's or at least one of the theories. There's expectancy value theory will say that levels of motivation are determined by the extent to which I believe I can do something successfully and the extent to which I care about what it is. I value it for some reason. So when we start thinking about the consequences, well, those outcomes are part of the reason why we care about it. And so I think that it's not the pressure that's putting us into a position to really approach something, really attack it, and really get us going. It's motivation. It's just simply that we care. It matters to us. So what we're describing isn't pressure. That's not the helpful part. The helpful part is recognizing that some aspect of the situation that we're in matters to us, and it matters to us a lot. And that increase in motivation, that increase in drive is what we're experiencing.
Mm, interesting. Awesome. Brian Hite, dude, thank you so much for coming on. I know it's a crazy day for you, so I really appreciate you taking time and jumping on. I really like how your mind works and from the experience that you've had from everything that you do. I think this stuff is so important, so I really appreciate you coming on.
Oh, well, thank you very much for having me. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Same as well. So if people want to check out more of what you got going on, what's the best place that we can direct them?
The website's the best place, brianhiteglobal.com, BrianHite, global.com. And on there, you can find more information about the program or more information about the programs I have, stress, pressure, motivation, burnout, etc. You can find a little bit more information about me, and you can just send me a message directly or schedule a discovery call. Happy to have the conversation, because I'll tell you, if this is stuff that you're struggling with, or if you're a coach and you have people that you coach and they're struggling with pressure, with stress, with really getting themselves going and maintaining that motivation over a long time, or burnout, please just take a look at the stuff and give me a shout. I'd love to have a conversation with you. Those are tough places to be. I've been there myself, and I love working with people to help move them into the place where they truly can be at their best consistently.
I love it. Brian, thank you so much, brother. Appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
Awesome. Listeners, thank you so much. I'll catch you guys on the next one. All right. Peace.